Hello, 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 hello. All right, let's make sure our levels are good. Yeah, 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 levels good. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Oh, oh. Pop out. Pop out. There we go. Oh, I'm almost not feeling this today. Okay, people, hello. Good morning. Hello, hello, hello. Okay, there we are. Now. Mm, 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 mm. Okay, can't make that any smaller. All right. So we're doing chapter 17 today of this light progression novel. Let's adjust the light. I love having remote control lights. Do we want to turn it off? Yeah, let's turn it off. Or do I want to turn those off? Oh, that's better. That's much better. Okay. Avoid the migraines. Avoid the migraines. The migraines. There's my water. I got Noam Chomsky here. That's my buddy. My buddy, bud. Okay, let's free up that desk space. Adjust thine self, sir. Prepare for work. Okay. I hear a reflection coming from somewhere. I know it looks like a crazy person, but we got to find it. It's coming from over here. So, are we going to do it this way? Yeah. Okay. Let's move. We're not moving, no. Mr. Chomsky, you're good. Now I'll just move my chair. Oh, excuse me. Hello? Hello? Oh, that's much better. Okay. And we'll close the sound curtain. Testing. Ooh, that's a big old reflection from there. Okay. Let's not do that. Okie dokie. And then we're going to adjust you a wee bit. Sorry for the noise. But we try not to do head-ons. Is that secure? No, that's not secure. Because that's how you get plosives and proximity effects and stuff. So, whoa. That is your distance for voiceover. This is your distance. You want it off to the side. That way you don't get the poof sounds. Okay, okie dokie. Ooh, I got my Sasquatch hat. Let's not do that one. Let's do this one. All right. And where? Adjust forward. Moving. All right, now Everything's set up. Make a marker. 1, 2, 3, 4. Chapter 17. That's a lot of teeth. A crackling fire did nothing to raise Rolf's spirits. He stared into it, waiting for the pot of water to boil as Eliard bustled about their small camp outside of the entrance to the central labyrinth. They had stumbled out of the gaping stone maw covered in scrapes and bruises, only narrowly escaping what had turned into a more elaborate trap than they expected. Only narrowly escaping what had turned into a more elaborate trap than they had expected. Every one of their chalk marks had been removed or replaced, and as they traversed their path back, both knew. And as they traversed their path back, both knew they couldn't rely on anything but their shoddy memories to get them back to the beginning. It wasn't safe to camp within the maze by themselves, without the bulk of a mature dinosaur to ward off would-be killers. Apparently, the miscreant had figured that out and set a confusing course for them to fall into the bleh. Apparently, the miscreant had figured that out and set a confusing course for them to fall into the deep pit, which only partially contained Gertrude once she had gotten herself stuck in it. Rolf snapped a dry root in half angrily, tossing it into the fire as he went over the last few hours into his head. Bleh. Tossing it into the fire as he went over the last few hours in his head. Zoom that out so it's a little less distracting. Make a marker because I'm talking. They had managed to get back to the... Stop it. They had managed to get back to the cave's... They had managed to get back to the maze's entrance, somehow, though Rolf had kept his promise to Gertrude in mind. At each turn, instead of chalk, he took the chisel end of his hammer and marked a shallow X on the floor near the wall. He hoped their foes wouldn't think to check for another set of marks. That's not the tone I want. He hoped their foes wouldn't think to check for another set of marks. He knew he had to get back to her. A splash of water derailed his train of thought, and a hot droplet sizzled on his cheek. Rolf hastily wiped it away with a snarl. "Watch what you're doing!" Eliard, who was tossing the last bits of conjured rations into the pot, gave him a sour look. The man stirred the pot twice, then went back to sit on his bedroll. Rolf considered their flight and recognized that Eliard didn't deserve his ire. Thankfully, they hadn't encountered any more of the armored talking minotaurs, but a handful of goblins had harried them as they fled. They had barely scratched the surface. Of the labyrinth's central maze, but had lost their strongest party member. Damn it, that's not the one. They had barely scratched the surface of the labyrinth's central maze, but had lost their strongest party member, and 2 delvers were never meant to take on a level this deep by themselves. The cleric, beyond his skill with the lance, had done more for their escape than Rolf had ever expected. His divine spellcasting was much more powerful than any previous demonstrations, even going as far as to conjure a sword made entirely of magic. A perfect defense for the two of them as they warded off the slings and spears of the small party of monsters during their retreat. The goblins had stopped pursuing them after two of them managed to kill a few of them. After the two of them managed to kill a few of them, I need to silence notifications because people are trying to talk to me elsewhere in life. Okay, let's put do not disturb on that one until this evening. Okay, and then we're gonna double mark that. The goblins had stopped pursuing them after the two of them managed to kill a few of them, but they also passed a decent distance, so Rolf had no way of knowing where they were restrained. But they also passed a decent distance, so Rolf had no way of knowing whether they were restrained geographically or had given up due to attrition and attrition. But they had also passed a decent frickety fruck. But they had also passed a decent distance, so Rolf had no way of knowing whether they were restrained geographically or had given up due to attrition and fear. Where's my water? I'm clicky, guys. I'm clicky. He was likely to find out when they ventured back inside, but they needed some time to lick their wounds. Rolf had been out of magic before their hasty exit, and based on their seeping cuts and gashes, Eliard was dry as well, or he'd have healed them both by now. Sorry, Rolf muttered. We're all a little worn out here, Eliard grumbled. It's to be expected. He was beginning to get sick of the scent of the dungeon. He was beginning to get sick of the scent of the dungeon delving stew. Eliard swore by it, but the conjured rations were, in a word, tasteless. Like something halfway between paper and gravel, but smelled far too much salt than was necessary. Wet dog and, surprisingly, onion? We shouldn't have left her alone like that. She'll be fine. Happens all the time. Eliard ladled stew into their bowls and passed his across the way. Nope. Eliard ladled stew into their bowls and passed his across the way. Rolf winced at the rations, but tucked in. You say that, but we really could have used her back there. Nope. You say that, but we really could have used her back there. Eliard frowned. She was slowing us down. That was the point. That was the point. Rolf's surprise morphed into anger. We are finding a way to get her out of the dungeon. Or weren't you listening? Eliard scoffed. Of course I was listening. Are you hearing yourself? You want to bring a monster out of the labyrinth. Fury rose in Rolf's chest. Soup forgotten, he launched himself across the space. One hand grabbed a fistful of Eliard's shirt, and the other crashed into the cleric's jaw. The man sputtered, his saliva specked with the blood. Nope. The man sputtered, his saliva specked with the blood from a tear on his lips. Lip. His saliva specked with blood from a tear on his lip. But Rolf didn't pause. He was exhausted, hungry, and above all, angry. Even still, his outburst was short-lived. By the third punch, his wrist strained and Eliard was looking worse for wear. Eliard shoved him off the moment the onslaught ended, swiping a hand over his busted lip and testing his jaw. What in Liat's name do you think you're doing? Instead of answering, Rolf stood to retrieve his discarded rations and filled his bowl with a second helping. Water! Instead of answering, Rolf stood to retrieve his discarded rations and filled his bowl with a second helping. You're insane, Eliard hissed, feeling his nose. How about, you're insane, Eliard hissed, feeling his nose. Eliard wasn't wrong. Flying off the handle and punching someone was something Rolf would never have considered even a month ago. He shrugged. Clean yourself up. Let's get back to Gertrude. For some reason, Eliard didn't argue with him. They packed up a few hours later, sharing only a few words. They had come to the unspoken agreement that Rolf had been justified in his attack, and Eliard was going to keep quiet the rest of their trip back to the dinosaur. In the meantime, the cleric had found a shred enough of his... Okay. In the meantime, the cleric had found a shred enough of his magic to clear up his most immediate injuries, which didn't include his brand new bruised eye. They walked steadily down the tunnels, following the chiseled arrows that had thankfully remained untouched. By the sixth arrow, they found... By the sixth arrow, they felt rather than heard. By the sixth arrow, they felt rather than heard the rumble start low in the ground beneath their feet. Eliard paused and bent his hand to the stone. He paled. Back up! Back up! He hissed, shoving Rolf backwards. What is it? She was right, Eliard managed. Get up that outcropping. Rolf pulled himself up. Rolf pulled himself up. No. Rolf pulled himself up on a natural ledge and helped Eliard up into the space. What do you mean? Eliard shushed him. Eliard shushed him and drew back away from the edge, so they could hardly make out the floor below. Stay down, he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. Rolf scowled, uncertain of what could have caused the man so much fear. He opened his mouth to challenge the coward when the scratches of talons on stone raised the hair on his arms. He, he wiggled along his stomach so he could peer over the edge. Small creatures and their furred bodies thundered through the corridor, swarming over the floor in such magnitude he couldn't make out the stone beneath their feet. Teeth and sharp spears flashing. Teeth and sharp spears flashed through the fray, and Rolf leaned forward to get a closer. Nope. And Rolf leaned closer to get a closer look when Eliard yanked him back by his collar. He shook his head and put a finger to his lips. Rolf considered arguing with him for all of the briefest moments. Rolf considered Rolf considered arguing with him for all of the briefest moments before he registered the genuine fear in the man's eyes. Of all the monsters they'd fought, he had never seen Eliard so frightened. Eventually, the thunder of small footsteps drifted down the corridor. Eliard waited several minutes of silence. Eliard waited several minutes of silence before he nodded stiffly and started climbing down. What were they? Rolf asked. What were they? Rolf asked. Keep your voice down, Eliard growled, keeping him down from the wall. No. Eliard growled, helping him down from the wall. We can't take them in our state. We couldn't take them by ourselves in our best condition. That what the hell just happened? Okay. What were they? Rolf asked. Keep your voice down, Eliard growled, helping him down from the wall. We can't take them in our state. We couldn't take them by ourselves in our best condition. They looked like little kobolds, Rolf observed. Eliard had picked up his pace, and Rolf struggled to match it. Do they really pose such a threat? Eliard shook his head and powered on. Let's find your dinosaur. Let's find your dinosaur, he grumbled. I'm not going to argue with an idiot with porridge for brains. What did you call me? Eliard turned. One of those, sure. Oops. One of those, sure. Drop kick it into a wall. Go about your day. He gestured wildly, encompassing the entire tunnel. But hundreds of them? Tell me how you might fare. I don't know. Do they have teeth? Rolf hazarded. Razor teeth and sharp objects. We can't face them alone. We need your stupid monster. All right, folks. If you got questions, hit them. If not, that's cool. I'll drink this coffee, do a quick vocal break. Maybe step out and pee. Pee. Oh, that coffee's good. I'm gonna step out and be. Noam Chomsky is gonna keep you company while I come back. BRB. Let's not show the world my wedgie. Boom, bam. Yo ho, all hands, hoist the colors high. Hip ho. It'd be fun if I could get that note. Thieves and beggars, never shall we die. And the sun, let's sail the seas. Fade the squall until the fur's released. Mm-hmm. 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 Bathe the squall, and when we roam, we'll roll. Yo ho, all hands, hoist the colors high. Bum, 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 hero. Thieves and beggars, never shall we die. Mm-hmm. I've got a lovely bunch of coconuts, speedily deed. Here they are standing in a row, plum, plum, plum. Big ones, smaller ones, some as big as your head. Give it a twist, a flick of the wrist, and then the rest are dead. Okay, I'll be back. Okay, I believe you. All right, I'm back. You know, anytime an AGG person gets up to do things, they find other things to do. I fought it. Be proud. Be proud. Mm-hmm. All right. So the schedule today is we're going to narrate a bit, and then I'm going to go take a nap. And then after that, we're going to do some Q&A at around probably 1 while I edit and EQ some novel audiobook audio. And then after that, we're going to switch over to war dolly painting. Yay, miniature painting. Because normally on Wednesdays I go out to paint, but today I kind of want to just stay inside. I got a little bit of anxiety and I don't want to deal with the outside today. I've dealt with it enough. So that's the plan. You, me, Noam Chomsky. We're going to chill. All right. In the TikTok stream, I'm going to restart. That way we can maybe get some more followers. Okay. End live. End now. And we're going to go ahead and go live. This is for the YouTube folks. All right. Is that an airplane? We might have to wait for this airplane to pass over. Maybe have to wait for the airplane to pass over. Hey, Nip. JB, what's up? Christian, hello. Fabian, hello. Well, Jado, hello. We're waiting on this airplane to see if it's going to pass over the studio or if I can start recording. Because they get loud. Nate, what's up? Franz. Okay. I think it's buggered off, buggered on, however that works. However you bugger. As long as it's out of my audio range, I don't care. All right. We got the distance. He's going the distance. All right. So chapter 18. That will Chapter 18. That will never work. Rolf had never seen a dead dinosaur. He hadn't laid eyes on a live one before tumbling into the labyrinth, but this was not a sight he wanted to check off his list. The great T-Rex's chest didn't move as Rolf stepped to the bridge. The great T-Rex's chest didn't move as Rolf stepped to the edge of the pit. Her head lolled to one side, resting against the level of the stone floor he stood on. The majority of her body had slumped into the space below, spikes showing through the thinner parts of her body. He was sure there were more, but he imagined her bulk hid them like a pincushion. Rolf's chest tightened. Mm-mm. Rolf's chest tightened, and his breath came in short, sharp gasps. He dropped to his knees and placed a hand on Gertrude's cold scales. I wasn't sure if she'd still be here. Eliard came up beside Rolf and placed a hand on his shoulder. She was a mighty beast. How does it work? Hmm? Eliard asked. The labyrinth. She told me she'd been reborn countless times. How does it work? Maybe we could go wait for a bit. Maybe we could go wait there for a bit. Go back and get her? It's not always consistent, but as far as I understand, she won't be reborn until we either leave or die. Then the next Delvers to enter will encounter her again. Then the next Delvers to enter will encounter her again. Rolf heaved a sigh and considered for a moment. So we're doomed. You and I can get out of here through the other gate. You and I can get out of here through the other gate. Mm-mm. You and I can get out through the other gate, Rolf. I know you made a promise, but she's dead now. We can go back. A tear rolled down Rolf's cheek. He took off his pack and began fishing around in it. Get me a rope, will you? What do you need that for? If we're going, I'm not leaving her like this. Rolf, she spared me and saved my life besides yours too. Eliard opened his mouth to speak, but Rolf raised a hand. Maybe it's stupid, but I don't care. Help me get down into the pit. I want to remove this. Help me get down into the pit. I want to remove what spikes I can. Rolf knelt and continued removing items from his pack, placing them to the side as he searched for one of the chisels he'd taken with him from Scholza. Eliard gasped when Rolf set down the 2 potion bottles he had saved from the original party's stores. Rolf glanced over to find him staring at them. What? It's not like the healing potion will do anything. What? No, idiot. The other one. Where did you get it? Beside the red healing potion, the other iridescent bottle shimmered, its colors shifting and glittering in the light. Eliard's magic had kept tongue-tied. Yes, we're a little tongue-tied this morning. Yeah, see? Beside the red healing potion, the other iridescent bottle shimmered, its colors shifting and glittering in the light. Eliard's magic had kept Rolf from dipping into his Eliard's magic had kept Rolf from dipping into this meager apothecary, and he didn't recall if he had ever told Eliard he possessed them still. Your friend's packs. These were the only 2 bottles to survive. Why? What's this one do? Eliard swallowed heavily. It's a potion of resurrection. I've had that on me the whole time. Maiden's grace. I hadn't even wrapped it for safety. Eliard stooped and attempted to snatch the potion, but Rolf was quicker and pulled it away from his grasping hand. Don't you dare. I can use this on Gertrude. Now, Rolf, Eliard said, raising his hands in supplication, don't be hasty. We can save it for the trip. Now, Rolf, Eliard said, raising his hands in supplication, don't be hasty. We can save it for our trip out, just in case. For what? Eliard's. Rolf's ire rose, and the hair on the back of his neck stood. For when we encounter something the two of us can't handle, then after it kills one of us, the other one can bring that one back so it can do the. Then, after it kills one of us, the other can bring that one back so it can do it a second time? Eliard frowned. We don't even know if it works on monsters. We don't even know if it works on monsters. Rolf glared at the man. She is no monster. Eliard's grumpy expression deepened, but he said nothing. You said it yourself. I made a promise, Rolf went on. I might not be good for much, but by the triad, if I have a chance to keep my word, I'm going to do it. Now get me a length of rope so I can get these spikes out of her. Best if we remove them before I try the potion. Rolf tucked both potions into his pouch, well out of reach of the cleric, then secured his hammer and chisel on his belt. Eliard's face was grim, but he had let out. Eliard's face was grim, but he let out a length of rope and helped lower Rolf down into the pit. Under a controlled descent, it wasn't nearly as dangerous as it would have been as a surprise. Closer examination yielded a fuller picture for Rolf. The spikes turned out to be Closer examination yielded a fuller picture for Rolf. The spikes turned out primarily to consist of old corroded spears. A number of their halves had shattered under Gertrude's weight without piercing her scales. What wasn't an old weapon was a long chunk of stone or metal. He stepped gingerly around the various obstacles and inspected the dinosaur's still form. A small passage led off from the pit itself, only visible from his new vantage below the floor. But now wasn't the time for exploration. Blood had seeped from multiple wounds, and he got up close and personal with some of the spearheads that had pierced all the way through the thinnest parts of her legs. It was a gruesome sight. It was a gruesome sight, and Rolf's gorge rose each time he slipped in a. It was a gruesome sight, and Rolf's gorge rose each time he slipped in a slick pool. He worked carefully, doing his doing his breast. Mwah! I am using an AKG C414. Hi, buddy. Good to see you. It was a gruesome sight, and Rolf's gorge rose each time he slipped in a slick pool. He worked carefully, doing his best to break the offending shards with his tools, then using his enhanced strength to pull them free of her flesh. Rolf winced every time, even though Gertrude was beyond pain. Eliard stayed above on the solid floor, seeming to supervise after a time and call out spears Rolf had missed. Eventually, the pile of sharp, pointy bits far outnumbered the remaining ones Rolf couldn't reach. There was no effective way to remove the dinosaur to get at anything underneath her, and he prayed the magic would take care of those few. How do I do this? Rolf called up to Eliard. It's a potion. Rolf closed his eyes and sucked air through his teeth in frustration. I know it's a potion, but I've never fed one to a dinosaur before. Because you're not supposed to. If you're not going to be helpful, just say so. Eliard replied after a few moments' pause. I'm not going to be helpful. This is a stupid idea. Fine, Rolf huffed. I'll figure it out without you, and then I'll let Gertrude eat you when she's on her feet again. Fine, Eliard cried. He fixed the loose end of his rope to an iron sconce. He fixed the loose end of his rope to an iron sconce and shimmied down to join Rolf in the pit. It was much easier. It was much easier going now that the mason had removed so many of the protrusions. Oh, excuse me. Where was I? Water. That's where I was. Water. Pull her jaw open. Nope, that's too low. Pull her jaw open. Nope. Pull her jaw open, Rolf said, gesturing to the dinosaur's closed maw. Me? Why don't you do it, and I'll feed her the potion? Which do you want? To be the one on the outside holding her mouth open, or the one putting their hand inside to pour it down her gullet? Eliard considered. Eliard considered for half a second before nodding. I'll just go pull her jaw open. Rolf gave a silent prayer. Goddesses, save me from cowards. The cleric hooked his fingers into what would count as Gertrude's lips and heaved. Her teeth parted only slightly more than a hand's breadth. Rolf gestured for him to widen the gap, but Eliard shook his head, and his arms shivered from the strain. Now or never, Eliard grunted. Rolf swore, popped the top of the shimmering potion, then crammed the whole bottle into the dinosaur's mouth. He splashed some of the iridescent liquid against her tongue and threw the remainder straight toward her throat. He pulled his arm back just in time for the weight of Gertrude's head to snap her teeth shut again. Eliard cried out and shook his hands like he had caught them in a door. No blood sprayed from them, so Rolf assumed he still possessed. No blood sprayed from them, so Rolf assumed he still possessed all of his digits. Rolf sat back on his haunches. How long do we wait? Eliard stuck one offended finger in his mouth and joined him in front of the motionless creature. No idea. I've never had to use one of these the right way before, let alone this. They sat together for 5 minutes before Eliard stood and patted Rolf on the nope. Nah. They sat together for 5 minutes before Eliard stood and patted Rolf on the shoulder. I'm not going to say I told you so, but you told me so. I guess this means we head back. They were 2 steps away from the rope when Gertrude's roar shook the room. She back. Yay. Chapter 19, The Lion's Paw. Gertrude struggled wildly to regain her feet. Her greatest injuries closed as he watched, but the spikes he hadn't managed to remove. Okay. Distance. That's the distance. Yes. Gertrude struggled wildly to regain her feet. Her greatest injuries closed as he watched, but the spikes he hadn't managed to remove remained lodged in her side. As she moved, they shifted and tore, leaking fresh blood. Rolf tried to summon his spell to speak with her, to calm her, but they hadn't rested properly before coming back into the maze. He had been in such a hurry to return that he hadn't considered he was powerless as the day he rolled into the caverns of the labyrinth. No, he thought, I'm not the same. Not anymore. What are you doing standing there? Eliard cried. What are you doing standing there? Eliard cried as he climbed the rope. Get clear, Rolf yelled back, but instead of joining Eliard in his ascent, he stepped toward the raging dinosaur. He spoke in an even tone with his palms down in front of him, in what he hoped was a calming gesture. Let me help you. The eyes fixed on him were feral and uncomprehending. Gertrude finally stood on unsteady limbs, shaking her head from side to side as if to clear sleep from it. Rolf guessed that it might be necessary if he had spent time being dead. Rolf guessed that it might be necessary if he had spent time dead, but saved those thoughts for later. She didn't attack him, which he took as a positive sign, and edged forward. As his boots scraped through the rubble littering the floor, Gertrude's attention narrowed on him. Easy, easy, he repeated, drawing out the words like he might suit a horse. He was within reach of one of her haunches, where a spear protruded from a wound that would have killed a man Rolf's size. It was within... He was within reach of one of her haunches, where a spear protruded from a wound that would have killed a man Rolf's size. He moved to grasp it, but Gertrude swung her body around and snapped at Rolf. He dodged to the side, and she lifted her head, screaming. The sound deafened Rolf in the small space. He circled as best he could to regain his proximity to the weapon sticking out of her skin. I guess we do this the hard way, he muttered, then lunged for the haft. Gertrude's maw darted down again, her hot breath pouring out over Rolf as she narrowly missed biting his head off. Her aim was imperfect, but not terrible, and her teeth closed around the collar of his shirt. Gertrude yanked Rolf upward, and the memory of her flinging half a minotaur into the air made Rolf's stomach flip, even more than the forces she was applying to his torso. Gertrude yanked Rolf upward, and the memory of her flinging half a minotaur into the air made Rolf's stomach flip even more than the forces she was applying to his torso. He maintained his grip on the spear shaft, using the momentum to rip the barb from her body. A bright spray of blood accompanied it, and she dropped Rolf. A bright splay. And a bright spray of blood accompanied it. I lost my place. Damn it. There we go. Found it. Found it. A bright spray of blood accompanied it, and she dropped Rolf to the ground as she howled in pain. His first gambit had paid off, and he tossed the rusty weapon to the side, pulling the remaining potion out of his pouch. Rolf pulled the cork with his teeth as he rushed Gertrude. In retrospect, Rolf might have considered running headlong toward an enraged dinosaur to be the single dumbest choice of his entire life. Thus far, anyway. Gertrude clearly hadn't expected the small man to push his attack, and her response was sluggish. She once more attempted to catch him in her jaws, but they closed over open air as Rolf ducked. No. I thought, okay, so work doesn't work. We're going to put it on Do Not Disturb. Suck on that phone call. There we go. Okay, we're going to start from the top, because that was rude. Gertrude clearly hadn't expected the small man to push his attack, and her response was sluggish. She once more attempted to catch him in her jaws, but they closed over open air as Rolf ducked and slid the final few feet to reach her leg. This had better work, he prayed as he splashed the red liquid onto her gaping wound. The T-Rex's pained cries turned into a quizzical hiss that Rolf had learned meant surprise from their time in Scholza. He took the opportunity and scrambled back toward the rope. Rolf had one hand on the braided line when a concerned trill came from behind him. He turned and found Gertrude staring at him with his eyes once again with no. He turned and found Gertrude staring at him with eyes once again in focus. Though full of discomfort and confusion, she tilted her head in question, a gesture he had become so familiar with these past weeks. Rolf inhaled deeply and let out the longest sigh of relief. Yes, it's me, your supperling. How did you know the healing potion would work? Eliard asked. The three of them sat around a small fire among the rubble in the pit trap. Gertrude settled into a sleepy hillock against the small tunnel in the wall to block it. Rolf and Eliard sat an arm's length apart from one another, watching the beast's chest rise and fall. She had gone to sleep immediately when they'd settled into camp. Rolf had long shaken the terror from his limbs and washed the bile from his mouth. It was a wonder he didn't. It was a wonder he didn't need to replace his skivvies, frankly. You've seen hurt dogs, haven't you? Eliard considered this for a beat. I suppose I have. People aren't so different, if you can forgive the metaphor. Rolf grumbled. People aren't so different, if you can forgive the metaphor. Rolf grumbled. Get on with it. Dogs, people, whatever. When animals and people are injured, they will do everything in their power to make the hurt stop. They can't tell the difference between friends and enemies. They mistake help for hurt. Oh, man. Okay. Okay, I got that backwards. That was kind of confusing. It was confuserating. Okay. Eliard considered this for a beat. I suppose I have. People aren't so different, if you can forgive the metaphor, Rolf grumbled. Get on with it. Dogs, people, whatever. When animals and people are injured, they will do everything in their power to make the hurt stop. They can't tell the difference between friends and enemies. They mistake help for hurt. The stonemason shrugged. It's the same for Gertie. Eliard chuckled. She's Gertie now? Rolf smiled sheepishly. He supposed saving someone's life might earn you the right to give them a nickname, but he could never say that aloud lest Eliard, who was part of the delving party that saved his life before trying to sacrifice it, gave him one. Great snores rumbled through the dinosaur's large body. They weren't going to be worth anything in a fight this evening. They weren't going to be worth anything in a fight this evening. All of them needed rest. She didn't see us for anything but danger. The healing potion was just enough to bring her back to her senses. That doesn't work for people, Eliard scoffed. You back a man into a corner, he's going to fight whether you give him a potion or not. Says the cleric who set up a human sacrifice to escape the labyrinth. Rolf couldn't help the bitterness that threaded his words. It wasn't personal. You'll have to let it go sometime. Will I? Anyway, there are small pockets of beggars down by the river. Do you remember them? The city, built around the labyrinth's gaping maw, was bisected by a river. Anyone who visited Mayfair would know about it. Sure. Lots of people, like you, don't go down there. People like me too, Rolf admitted. We think it's unsafe. Eliard looked at him skeptically, and Rolf continued. A lot of them are pretty nice folk. Trouble is, they've been hurt. They're backed into corners. They're in a state of survival, like Gertrude. Rolf's eyes were getting heavy. He shrugged and turned over in his bedroll. You have first watch? Eliard frowned. Wait, you're just leaving me there? What was your point? Wait, you're just leaving me there? What was your point? Imagine the king gave them just enough to eat. Maybe roofs over their heads. Rolf shrugged. pulling a travel blanket beneath his chin. Suppose they wouldn't want to fight for morsels or food anymore. Suppose they wouldn't want to fight for morsels or food anymore. You're sure you're feeling all right? You're comparing enraged dinosaurs with beggars. I've dropped coins in their cups and the feral light in their eyes only once more. Rolf glanced once more at Gertrude. It'd be worth trying, though, wouldn't it? When Eliard didn't reply, Rolf gave in to the simple pull moan. Rolf gave in to the pull of his deep slumber. Gertrude was the first to wake them. Rather, the rumbling of her stomach and the licking of her chops woke them. Rolf felt that he had barely blinked. His body felt a mite lighter, though, and he was confident His body felt a mite lighter, though, and he was confident he could pull magic from the air again. Eliard snored a few feet away from him. Gertrude sighed and nuzzled her snout a bit closer to their camp, nudging at the coals and their packs. Hey, hey, Rolf argued, leaping to his feet. You're going to break something. Look, I know you're hungry. Just give me a second. Gertrude gave him an annoyed look, but settled back on her haunches. She gave him a gentle trill and turned her gaze to their packs. I'm on it, Rolf grumbled and riffled. I'm on it. I'm on it, Rolf grumbled and riffled through their packs. Rolf grumbled and riffled through their equipment. There wasn't much for the massive creature to eat, but he did find some of the last strips of mushroom jerky that would at least put her off from eating one of them for half an hour. They really needed to get a move on. He nudged Eliard with his boot. Get up, let's go. Eliard groaned something unintelligible, but sat up anyway, wiping the sleep from his eyes. Rolf started packing their things. We're going, Eliard managed, rolling out of his bedroll. We have to keep moving. Gertrude needs to eat. A skittering noise sounded from across the pit. Eliard rolled onto his feet in one swift motion, aiming his staff at the sound. Rolf frowned and scanned the area. Was it one of the miscreants they had seen the day before? What do they eat? Rolf whispered. Gertrude's eyes were fixated on a rock, her large tail lazily swaying in the air, feline-like. I don't know, Eliard whispered. Everything? Big things? Eliard gave Rolf a wry look and nodded his head toward Gertrude. Not that big. Rolf considered the giant lizard. Forget the miscreants, he thought. Maybe it was time to reintroduce the top of the food chain. All right, Gertie, we're going hunting. We're going hunting. Okay, it's time for a vocal break. It's about noon. So I should probably get lunch. I'm going to stop the stream here, and I'll be back later. Thanks for watching. Okay, bye. Welcome to live chat. Nope. Okay, what is happening right now? That wasn't it. Boop. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. There we go. I don't know why it wouldn't pull up. All right. Und now. Okay, bye.